I love apple crumble pie. I think it's so much better than the classic apple pie. Thumbs up if you agree. Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to make a delicious apple pie with a TWIX twist. So making apple pie, or making pies in general really, seems like it would be very easy because there are so few ingredients, but the challenge comes from making the crust. It requires quite a bit of time and a lot of arm strength. So I want to take you through the crust that I make first, and I make this crust with every pie that I make if I'm not using a store-bought crust. Don't worry, if you don't want to make your own crust, you can definitely go to the store and get a pre-made crust. I would highly recommend it. They're just as good as the real thing. The only thing that you're not getting is the satisfaction that you made it all from scratch, which I am totally fine with. If you do want to make your own crust, which I find, kind of therapeutic in a way, you can definitely do that, and I'm going to show you how right now. But before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that with pie, there are 2 ingredients that are never listed in the ingredients list, but are required when you're making any sort of pie. The first ingredient is time. The second ingredient is love. I know it sounds really cheesy, but my pies have turned out so much better if I take all the time in the world that I need and if I really just put my heart into it. So definitely use those 2 ingredients along with the other ones, and I hope that those 2 ingredients will be the thing that take your pie from something good to something amazing. So when you're making your pie crust, you're going to need flour, sugar, salt, butter, and water. You want to make sure that the water is ice cold. So what I like to do is fill up a glass with ice and then fill it with water and set it aside while I make everything else. You also want to make sure that your butter is frozen. So the night before I make my pie, I put my butter into the freezer and just let it get really, really cold. So when your butter is frozen and you've got some water on ice, grab a bowl, make sure it's big. Mine was not big enough, so you'll see that I've transferred it after I add the dry ingredients. So make sure you have a really big, hefty bowl because you're going to be doing a lot of hand work and you don't want it to spill over the edges. And mix your flour, salt, and sugar in the bowl. Once your dry ingredients are combined, grab a cheese grater and your frozen butter and grate the butter into your flour mixture. So once your butter is grated and mixed in, start sprinkling your water into the mixture. So it's going to be 12 tablespoons of water that you just sprinkle and stir with your fingers. And once all of the water is added, you just mix it around with your hands, start sort of kneading it a little bit with your fingers until a ball is formed. The pie that I'm making today does not require a top because I'm using a crumble top instead of a pie crust top. So this crust will actually make both the base and the top if need be. For this purpose, I'm not going to split it into 2, but if you do need to make a top, then split it into 2 and make sure that one of your balls is slightly larger than the other ball. Wrap the ball or balls up in plastic wrap and throw them in the freezer. You want to make sure that they're in the freezer for about an hour. A lot of recipes say that you can freeze your dough overnight. I hate doing this because it just means that it's going to be rock hard in the morning and it needs time to thaw. So I strongly encourage you to just take all the time that you need in one sitting to make your pie. I generally leave about 3 hours, even though it usually takes about 2. I like to have a lot of extra time. So if I know that I'm going to have 3 hours of uninterrupted time, then that's when I'm going to make my pie. While the pie crust is in the freezer, it's time to start making the filling. Before I cut up my apples, I like to make the crumble top so that I can set it aside and it's ready for me when I need it. So for the crumble, you just need 3 ingredients: brown sugar, flour, and butter. Mix your brown sugar and your flour together and then add your butter in small chunks. So my butter is room temperature, so you just want to take off little bits of the butter. It's sort of like cutting it in, but I don't cut it in. I just take it off with my fingers, and then you're using your hands again. Mix it all together so that little clumps are formed. I like to use Granny Smith apples for my pies. You can use whatever apples you like, but I like a crispy tart apple because it pairs well with all of the sugar that you add into the pie. So I like to peel my apples first and then chop them into quarters, core them. If you have an apple corer, even better. I don't have one, so I just cored mine the old-fashioned way with a knife. And then I like to cut each quarter into very, very small slices. What I like to do is when I take my quarter chunk of an apple, I like to cut it into at least 11 slices. So, you know, sometimes I'll get 13, but 11 should be the magic number. If you can get 11, you're good to go. Once all of my apples have been sliced, I add all of the rest of the ingredients. You're going to need cinnamon, nutmeg, sugar, and flour. You just mix it all together and add it to the apples. I like to add it in portions, so add about a third, toss the apples, add another third, toss the apples again, add the final third, continue tossing. This just makes sure that all of the apples have been covered really well and evenly. After the dough has been setting in the freezer for about an hour, it's time to grab your rolling pin and get rolling. You want to make sure that the surface that you're going to be rolling onto is lightly floured. Also flour your hands and the top and the bottom of the dough. So what you want to do is roll out the dough a little bit, like let's say your dough is this big, roll it till it's about this big, and then flip it over. Keep rolling until it's a little bit bigger, and then flip it over again. This will ensure that the dough doesn't stick to the surface that you're rolling it out onto. And it'll just make it so that you can maneuver it a little bit more so that it's an even circle, which is what you need it to be. So once the dough is the thickness that you like, I like a pretty thick dough, you want to lay it over your pie dish. For reference, I have a 9-inch pie dish and it's pretty deep. The dough should overlap the edges of the pie dish, so if it's not overlapping yet, keep rolling until it does. And because I'm using a dough that usually has enough for the base and the top, I'm going to have some leftover dough. What I like to do is cut around the edge of the pan so that it has a nice, even, smooth edge. And then I like to just push in where the divots are in the pan, if that makes sense. Once your crust is in the dish and ready to go, get your Twix pieces out. I love these bite-sized Twix pieces for baking. They are perfect. You don't have to do any cutting. Thumbs up to those. I just scatter a few Twix pieces on the base of the pie crust before I add the apple. Then I pour my apples into the pie crust and just even it out a little bit. You want to make sure that it has a nice even top. And then I take a few more Twix pieces. I don't like to have too many Twix pieces in my pie because I don't want it to take away from the apple flavor. I just like to have, you know, a few bites that have that nice chocolatey caramel taste to them. And so I add a few more Twix pieces just underneath the first layer of apples. And finally, it's time for the crumble top. So I like to just take small handfuls of the crumble from the mixing bowl and just sort of like sprinkle them on top until the whole top is fully covered and it looks even and it looks delicious. Before you place your pie in the oven, cover it loosely with some tin foil and then place it in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. Once the 25 minutes is up, remove the tin foil and bake for another 25 to 30 minutes, just until the top is golden brown. After you remove it from the oven, put it on a wire rack and let it cool completely before you start eating it. I know, it's very difficult. And that is how you make a pie. I love the pie crust recipe that I've been using. I got it from Chef Michael Smith, and it's very easy, also time consuming, but easy to follow, and it's a no-fail. I love it. I really hope that you enjoyed this recipe. Let me know if you did. And also let me know your favorite pie recipes in the comments below because I don't make very many pies. I'm not a huge fan of pie. I love a good apple pie, especially when there's chocolate in it. But I would love to try out some more, maybe some unusual pies. Maybe I'd like those. As long as it doesn't have custard in it, I'll give it a try. I'm not a custard fan. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in a couple of weeks with a new recipe video. And until then, happy baking!